Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 33. But before I get into the lesson, just want to take a minute and ask anyone who's watching these lessons to please like the lesson or consider subscribing to the channel. I put a lot of work into these lessons, and there's really not going to be any money in it for me. Just doing it out of the kindness of my heart, and I want the word to get out on these lessons because there's no point in me doing this if nobody's watching the lessons. So maybe if you think that this lesson was helpful or that it could be helpful to others, maybe you'll reach out and press the like button or consider subscribing to the channel. And also you can bookmark my page where you can find all my lessons. And I'd also ask anyone who likes this lesson to consider watching some of the other lessons. The series is set up, it's based on knowledge, and it basically takes you from, it provides a system for you to basically learn the guitar. And while individual lessons may not seem that appealing, if you watch the lessons in succession, you see how they add up to a system where we slowly reveal the guitar and chords that we can play. And eventually, the goal is to result in a pretty thorough knowledge of the guitar and a pretty thorough knowledge of chords and music theory. So anyway, I guess that's enough. I hope you have your guitar out, tuned to standard pitch. And I guess we're going to get into the lesson. So the subject of today's lesson is Sus4 chords and how they're used. So I guess the first question that comes to mind is, what is a Sus4 chord? Well, up on the screen, I have a C major scale with the notes of the scale numbered, and I also have the C major chord, the notes of the C major chord, where we have C, which is the root, E, which is the third, and G, which is the fourth. And I want to direct your attention to the E note, which is the third. And I've said this before, but the E note, the third, is pretty much the main note in a major chord, and it's what gives it the sound. So if we have a major chord and we have the third, a suspension happens when we move away from one of the notes of the chord. And generally it's a temporary thing. What happens is if we take the third of the chord, that is E, and we change that note to the fourth of the chord, or the fourth of the scale, which in this case is F, we get a suspension or a Sus4 chord. So, in a way, we sort of step away from the major chord, but it works because of a couple things. First of all, we still have the root and the fifth of the chord, which, as in with power chords, sort of does a pretty good job to sort of convey the chord. And also it works because generally speaking, any note in the scale will work with the root note. Now once you start combining that with other notes, it gets a little bit tricky. But when we have the major chord, we can take the third and we can change that note. And if we change the third to the fourth note of the scale, we get the Sus4 chord. So I want to take a look at some Sus4 chords. And the first one I want to look at is a D major Sus4 chord, or D Sus4. We're going to start out with, I'll start out with the version of the chord where I have the root note at the third fret on the B string. And then I'm playing at the second fret on the G string and the second fret on the E string. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to combine that with the open D note. So we get the D major chord. So what we need to understand is we need to understand the relationship. And I want to step away for a second because I forgot this. We need to understand the relationship between the third and the fourth. So I'm just going to go back to our example of a C chord. E is the third. So I'm just going to play the E note at the second fret on the D string. And what I want you to understand is E is the third and F is the fourth. And I can find the F note one fret above the E note. So what I sort of want to point out is wherever you can find the third in a chord, the fourth is only going to be one fret above the place where the third is on the same string. So now let's get back to our D sus chord. And this is where it's kind of important to know the notes of the chord. And again, I keep talking about my lesson series, and my lesson series is designed so that you can learn things like the notes of a chord. But anyway, if we have a D major chord, the F sharp note is the third, okay? And we can find our F sharp note at the second fret on the E string. So all we really need to do is we're going to take that F sharp note and we're going to change it to the fourth note in the scale, which is G. And all I'm going to do is reach up with my pinky and play the G note. And the way that this is usually done is this. I'll just demonstrate with strumming the chords. The Sus4 chord is played, and then the major chord is played after that. So we get kind of a, and we sort of play around the major chord. Now we can also start with the major chord and then go to the Sus4 and then go back. And we can also do things when we're picking the notes of the chord. And what's often done is we'll play the third of the chord and then we'll go to the fourth of the chord. And a lot of time it's done with a hammer on, which is basically you just take your finger and you hammer it onto the string. So I can... So that's an example of how we would use that chord. So all we really need to do to find a Sus4 chord is to have the major chord, and then we must change the third of the chord to the note that's the fourth. So the next chord I want to look at is the A Sus4 chord. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a version of the chord where I have my open E string, or excuse me, my open A string, and then I'm going to just bar across the D, G, and B strings at the third fret. So I have, those are the notes of my chord. And again, what I want to do is I want to direct your attention to the third. And in the A chord, the third is the C sharp note. And what we want to do is we want to change that C sharp note to the fourth, which is the D note. So our C sharp note is at the second fret on the B string. And we can find the fourth one fret above that. So to go from my A major to the Sus4 chord, I just change my note that I have on the B string from the note at the second fret, which is the C sharp, to the note at the third fret, and we have the D. And we can also pick around the notes. So you hear how it, so we kind of sort of just temporarily step away from that A chord to the Sus4 chord, but then that Sus4 chord returns us to the A. So that's our A Sus4. And the next one I want to look at is our E major Sus4. So we can use different versions of this chord. If I want to use the version where I'm strumming all 6 strings, I'll have my E root note, then I'm at the 2nd fret on the A and the D strings, and then I have my index finger at the 1st fret on the G string, and we have our E major chord. Well, again, in the E major scale, the 3rd note, which is also the 3rd in our chord, is the G sharp note, and that can be found at the 1st fret on the G string. So what I want to do is I want to change my note from the G sharp note to the A note, which is the 4th. So I'm just going to go from the note at the 1st fret to the note at the 2nd fret. So when I have an E chord, I could reach up here with my pinky and play that Sus4 note. And then I could return to the 3rd. So there's our A sus chord. Or excuse me, our E sus chord. And the last open chord that I want to look at is the G major chord. And in the G major chord, the 3rd of the chord is the B note. And in order to change the G major chord into the Sus4 chord, we're going to take that B note and we're going to move it up by a half step to make it into the 4th, which is C. So I'm going to start with a 4-string version of our G major chord, where I'm just going to play the open D, the open G, the open B, and then the octave G. So I have my G major chord. Well, again, my 3rd is the B, and that is the open B string. So in order to change that to the 4th, I just need to raise that by 1 fret or a half step, and I'm going to switch from playing the open B to the C note at the 1st fret. So if I have the G major, if I switch that note to the C, I have the sus chord. And you can pick it to there's just an example of how we can use that Sus4 chord along with the regular G chord and combine them together with picking to create a pattern. And that's the idea behind the Sus4 chord, is we're still staying major with our chord. We're just finding a way to sort of play around the chord. You can use Sus4 chords with movable chord forms. It can get a little bit trickier, but it can be done. So just as a demonstration, I'm going to start with my F major chord. And I can use a 3-note version of it, where I have my root note at the 1st fret of the E string. Then I bar across at the 1st fret of the B string. And then I reach up and I play the note at the 2nd fret on the G string. And I have my 3-note F major chord. Well, again, in the F major chord, the 3rd of the chord is A. And the A note is at the note I'm playing at the 2nd fret on the G string. So in order to turn that to the Sus4 chord, I need to raise that A note up by 1 fret. So I'm going to go from playing the A at the 2nd fret to playing the B flat at the 3rd fret. And now I have my Sus4 chord. So Sus4 major. So you can also play around that, and I can take this and I can move this to the 4-note version of the chord, where I'm going to add in my F note on the 3rd fret of the D string, and I can still use the same finger, same note, and I'm going to use my pinky to play the note. And this becomes a movable chord. So the important thing to understand is when you play this F chord, the 3rd is on the G string. And that's the note I'm playing with my middle finger. So as long as I understand that, I can move this chord. And now I have a G, and I can just do the same thing. And I have a movable Sus4 chord. But the key is to understand that where our 3rd is in the chord. And once we have our 3rd, we can understand wherever we move it, the position of our 3rd, and all we need to do is add the note that's 1 fret higher. So that's it. That's the basic fundamental information of the lesson. The Sus4 chord is essentially, theoretically, is simply created by taking a major chord and taking the note that's the 3rd of the chord and changing that to the note that's the 4th of the chord. And also understanding that wherever we have the 3rd of the chord, we have the 4th 1 fret higher on the same string. And also we want to understand that it's sort of, I don't know if passing is the right term to describe the chord, but I like to describe it as a chord that you can use to sort of play around a major chord and move a little bit away from the chord to give it a little variety, but also come right back to the chord. And it's used a lot in music. Often when you're listening to someone play a chord and you hear them do something and make a move that kind of moves away from that chord and then comes back to the chord, generally, well, not generally, there's a good chance that they're using a Sus4 chord. So I hope you will practice with your open string chords, because they are very popular with the open string chords. And then, of course, you can apply it to closed fingerings. It gets a little trickier then, but it can be done. So hopefully you'll add this to your arsenal and it'll make your playing more interesting. So that's it for now. Put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you at the next lesson. Peace.